Alright everyone, we start off today talking about a little bit of economic propaganda from the New York Times this time. Of course they've done this for some time anyway, but mainly it's like CNN and a few other groups. They coordinate openly with the White House. There are multiple corporate outlets, legacy media groups, that literally correspond with the White House on a regular basis whenever there's new economic news. Job data, labor force participation, which you don't often see them cover. There's a reason for that. Certainly inflation will be getting new numbers not too long from now. I do not expect them to be good. If inflation ticks down at all, it'll still be probably above 8%. If not, these groups will say, well, inflation has peaked and it's going away. Thanks, Biden. See what a wonderful president he is. It was never his fault that the inflation was rising, but it's clearly his responsibility that it's falling. I don't expect that to happen. It's probably going to remain more or less flat. It could rise by a few points. Anyway, now the New York Times is making probably the most hilarious claim so far as this post-announcement of this coordination. That was a couple months ago. Oliver Darcy broke that story, bragging about it, and for some reason they think this was an optics win for the Biden White House that they have to do this. Now the New York Times is saying that inflation could bring welcome change to the world. Now the premise of this has actually been spoken of before, including by some left-wing groups, not all of which are in league with Biden, to be clear. You have a fuzzy in my beard. It's the hazard of having cats around. Sorry about that. But the premise is that if inflation rises, the price of goods is soaring, that people will buy electric cars, they'll travel less, this will help with greenhouse emissions, they'll tighten their belts, they'll do more with less, and efficiency will rise, and it'll be great, we can save the world. The only problem being that the groups that inflation hit hardest are not in the socioeconomic rung capable of buying an electric car. The average price of an electric car is considerably higher than a standard vehicle, so they're not going to do that, number one. Number two, you've got problems with the power grid right now in multiple parts of the country with energy production to keep the grid going. So, I mean, if everyone were using electric cars, the grid would probably fail in certain parts of the country. So that's another sticking point on that particular end. You'll notice that Tesla shares are down considerably year over year. Nobody's buying electric cars. They can't afford it, because they have to divert more spending into basic goods. What the inflation really means is that people in the middle class are now buying cheaper shit, which tends to come from foreign shores. It's instead of buying the American-raised pork chops for the 4th of July to put on the Barbie, they're going to buy the cheaper substitute that was processed in a plant in China or India or something like that. Actually, the inflation will harm the economy in more ways than one and reduce efficiency. It will require more global trade lines, which are currently being hazarded as well. You can see that this is a little bit of a spiraling problem. The idea is that the bad economic data is actually a good thing. It's good for you. You know, we can solve the crisis of high home prices. This is another literal suggestion they're making by simply subdividing apartments and making pods. So basically they want to San Francisco-ize the entire urban landscape of the country. It's not going to affect the upper middle class. It's not going to affect rural America, where, we've got the same farm that our grandpappy built with his own two hands 100 years ago. They're not affected. It's going to affect urban areas mostly, and suburban areas as well. Of course, the middle class is having its head held underwater at the moment by Bidenomics. Well, inflation's not good. Having inflation at this level is certainly not good. Anything above 5% is considerably bad, especially when it's pacing far ahead of wage growth. That's the other thing that's constantly mentioned. Well, the inflation actually means that wages are rising at a much higher rate than they have over the last half century. Yes, but the problem is that the purchasing power of those higher wages isn't keeping pace with the price hikes. People in the lower classes are losing money. You break even if you're in the upper middle class, assuming that year over year you're actually making more. You're sort of dead in the water, but hey, you're not backsliding. You still got, you probably still can buy the domestic goods at that point. The rich are making out like bandits. The inflation is just raising the price of all of the luxury goods and, fourth homes and shit like that, and the yachts that are held by the elite. Of course, the people at the New York Times that run the organization, the higher level editorial staff and their CEO and stuff, they're all rich people. They have penthouses and gated communities with private guards. By the way, they want you disarmed, but their guards presumably will not be doing so. And anyway, this is literal propaganda. Again, this is coordinated explicitly with the White House. Their editorial staff parlay with the White House through various communiques whenever new data comes out. So before, certainly before Obama scrapped the U.S. government cannot use legacy media's propaganda rule, that was a long-standing rule. Obama scrapped it in his second term, of course, after the election, for a reason, in order to allow the federal government to engage in literal propaganda. We get this on Ukraine all the time now as well. I'm sure there's coordination there. More dire is the economic aspect. Americans are effectively being lied to on multiple levels. Lie by omission with labor force participation. Lie by structure in articles with regards to negative news when they have to report it. And then this. This is putting lipstick on a pig. This is painting a turd and making it look less turdy, effectively. It is morally wrong. It's unethical. It should be illegal. It was for a very long time for this sort of direct coordination to happen. I will posit one thing, though, which is that the coordination would happen through middlemen otherwise. Certainly, Obama didn't wait to scrap that rule, that long-standing rule against that kind of propaganda to coordinate with the media. In fact, he was headhunting after the few journos that sought to actually look into all the shit that he was doing. You'll remember the AP spying scandal. Fun times. I wonder why none of the other legacy media outlets really jumped on that. You'd think, well, shit, the president is headhunting after members of the journalistic class now. We have to band together and put a kibosh to this. No, they basically stepped back and didn't care. That's because they were on the government's payroll already. In fact, the only time in recent memory that the legacy media has conducted what could be roughly approximated to investigative journalism was when Trump was the president. And then it was still propaganda. It was just on the other end. It was, shoveling out shit instead of trying to cover for bad economic data. Because for the first 3 years, the economic data was very good. 3.5 almost. The fact is that inflation is not going to bring welcome change to the world. The problem is that the premise doesn't hold up to scrutiny when you realize that the kinds of changes that are being championed here, eating the bugs and so forth, they require mass investment into small businesses and startups. If you want a bug farm, you're going to have investment. With this economy, who's investing? Investments are beginning to fall apart. We're on the brink of a recession. We may already be in one right now. It could get far worse, by the way. So, before the bread lines start setting up and Bernie Sanders is looking out of his lavish house window at the poor and downtrodden and smiling and remembering his Soviet holidays, perhaps you should prepare. Dig in the extra line of winter wheat to come late autumn. It's not going to bring welcome change. Individuals don't have the kind of money on hand to do that. I mean, even the idea of subdividing apartments. Okay, so you've got this apartment and you're like, well, I can split this into like 7 or 8 pods and I can sublease them out to people. I can subrent them to people and maybe I can become a landlord of a literal pod slum. That sounds wonderful. Where are you going to get the money to invest in actually creating the subdivision of that apartment? Where's the money coming from? Hell, even the construction materials to do so, assuming that you're up to code in an urban area, the red tape, the legalese is quite advanced, it's going to be a little bit of a problem funding that. Again, unless you can get a loan. Well, doesn't this sound like we're setting ourselves up for yet more failures over the next couple of years if this kind of great reset mentality is followed? They haven't really thought this through entirely. The people that hope to make money out of this really haven't thought it through. It's the powered, moneyed interests that don't care about that end of things and really just want to collapse society and enslave us all. They know what they're doing. But the people that are latching onto the idea, including elements of the sub-legacy media, they're completely clueless. It's actually kind of scary. That's about all. Peace out.